The late-night flight from San Francisco to New York was half empty. The cabin lights dimmed as most passengers tried to catch some sleep. Michael Chen stared out the small oval window, watching the lights of cities below fade in and out through patches of clouds. At 17, he was traveling alone for the first time, and the weight of his family's future sat heavy on his narrow shoulders. His mom had always told him he was born with old eyes. "You see too much," she would say, smoothing his hair as he worried about bills he wasn't supposed to know about. Now those eyes were tired, red-rimmed from too many late-night studying and early mornings helping his mom get to her treatments. Michael shifted in the uncomfortable economy seat and pulled out a dog-eared medical textbook from his backpack. He'd found it at a second-hand bookstore, and its margins were filled with notes from a previous owner, a medical student who had apparently passed their exams. Michael hoped it was a good sign. 3 rows ahead, he noticed a couple boarding late. Even in his exhaustion, it was hard to miss them. The man wore a suit that probably cost more than Michael's entire college fund, and the woman, visibly pregnant, was dressed just as elegantly despite her condition. Flight attendants fussed around them as they settled into their first class seats. "That's Victor Harrington," whispered the elderly woman beside Michael, who had been pretending to sleep. "The tech guy, worth billions." She said the word billions like it was a foreign and slightly distasteful concept. "His face is all over those business magazines my son reads." Michael nodded politely but returned to his book. Rich people were from another world, one that had nothing to do with his life of discount grocery stores and scholarship applications. In his neighborhood, people worked 2 or 3 jobs just to make rent. His own mother had done the same until she got sick. Cancer had come suddenly, a storm that washed away their already fragile financial stability. Medical bills piled up faster than autumn leaves. Their small savings disappeared first, then came the loans, and finally, the notice of foreclosure on the small house his mother had scraped to buy after his father left. Michael was on this flight because of a series of unlikely events. His science teacher had submitted his research project to a national competition without telling him. He'd won, and now 3 Ivy League universities had invited him for interviews. They were talking scholarships, full rides if he was lucky. It was his one shot at medical school, at becoming the doctor he'd promised his mother he would be one day. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude of 36,000 feet. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "We're expecting a smooth flight to New York tonight with an arrival time of approximately 5:45 a.m. Eastern Time." Michael checked his watch. Nearly midnight now. He should sleep, but anxiety kept him alert. He'd never been on a plane before this trip. The scholarship interviewers would expect him to be sharp, articulate, impressive. Not a tired kid from the wrong side of town with second-hand clothes and worn-out shoes. His thoughts were interrupted by a commotion several rows ahead. The pregnant woman, Mrs. Harrington, had stood up suddenly and was now doubled over, clutching her belly. Her husband was on his feet immediately, his hand on her back, concern etched across his face. "It's too early," Michael heard her say, her voice tight with pain. "It's not supposed to happen yet." A flight attendant rushed to their side, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. The woman's face had gone pale, beads of sweat forming on her forehead despite the cool air of the cabin. "Is there a doctor on board?" The flight attendant's voice came over the intercom, surprisingly steady despite the panic in her eyes. "We have a medical emergency. If there's a doctor or medical professional on board, please press your call button immediately." The cabin remained silent. A few passengers looked around nervously, but no call buttons lit up. Michael felt his heart rate quicken. He wasn't a doctor, not even close, but he'd volunteered at the free clinic in his neighborhood for 2 summers. The doctor there, an older man named Dr. Patel, had taken Michael under his wing, teaching him basic procedures. They'd been short-staffed, and Michael had assisted with everything from setting broken bones to, yes, even 2 deliveries when mothers couldn't make it to the hospital in time. Still, he hesitated. He was just a kid. What if he made things worse? The pregnant woman let out a low moan that cut through his doubts. Her water had broken, creating a small puddle on the cabin floor. Her husband looked terrified, all his wealth and power useless in this moment. Michael's hand moved to the call button before his brain had fully decided. A soft ding sounded, and the flight attendant looked his way. "I'm not a doctor," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "But I've helped with deliveries, before, at a clinic." The relief on the flight attendant's face was immediate and alarming. She gestured for him to come forward. Michael stuffed his textbook back into his bag and made his way up the aisle, suddenly aware of how all eyes in the cabin were now on him. Mrs. Harrington was breathing in short, sharp gasps. Her husband held her hand so tightly his knuckles were white. "She's only 8 months," Mr. Harrington said, his voice stripped of the confidence that had built his empire. "The baby's not due for another 4 weeks." Michael nodded, trying to project a calm he didn't feel. "What's your name?" he asked the woman softly. "Elena," she managed between breaths. "Elena, I'm Michael. I need to know how far apart your contractions are." Her eyes widened with another wave of pain. "Close," she gasped, "very close." The head flight attendant, a woman in her 50s with a name tag that read Patricia, pulled Michael aside. "The captain's looking for somewhere to make an emergency landing, but the nearest airport is at least an hour away. Can you—" She didn't finish the question, but her meaning was clear. Michael swallowed hard. An hour would be too late. This baby was coming now. "We need to move her somewhere with more space and privacy," he said, surprised at how steady his voice sounded. "And I'll need clean towels, hot water if possible, a first aid kit, and any other medical supplies you have on board." Patricia nodded briskly and began issuing orders to the other flight attendants. Within minutes, they had cleared the rear galley of the plane, laying down clean blankets on the floor. 2 male passengers helped carefully move Elena, who was now in the grips of regular, powerful contractions. Victor Harrington followed, his face ashen. "She has a condition," he told Michael quietly. "Pregnancy-induced hypertension. Her doctor said it could complicate things." Michael's stomach tightened with fear, but he nodded calmly. "I'll keep that in mind. Right now, I need you to help keep her calm and support her." As the makeshift delivery area was prepared, Michael washed his hands thoroughly in the tiny bathroom. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, a scared teenager with messy black hair and dark circles under his eyes. "You can do this," he whispered to himself. "Remember what Dr. Patel taught you." He thought of his mother, fighting her own battle, in a hospital bed back home. She'd always told him he had healing hands. Now, somewhere over the middle of America, those hands would be tested as never before. When he returned to the galley, Elena was lying on the blankets, her elegant dress replaced with airline blankets for modesty, her face contorted with another contraction. "They're less than a minute apart now," Victor said, his voice shaking. Michael knelt beside Elena and took her hand. "Elena, I know this isn't what you planned, but we're going to get through this together, okay? I need you to trust me." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, noticing his youth. For a moment, doubt flickered in her eyes, but another contraction washed it away. She nodded, clutching his hand. "I'm going to check how far along you are," Michael explained gently, pulling on surgical gloves from the first aid kit. After a quick examination, he knew there was no turning back. "The baby's crowning," he announced. "Elena, when the next contraction comes, I need you to push." The next few minutes were a blur of instructions, encouragement, and Elena's determined efforts. Victor held her hand, whispering words of love and support, his billions of dollars and business empire forgotten in this most human of moments. Patricia stood by, handing Michael supplies as needed and relaying updates to the captain. The other passengers had been moved to the front of the plane, but the news of what was happening had spread, and a tense silence filled the cabin. "One more big push," Michael urged, his hands steady despite the enormity of what was happening. "You're doing great, Elena. I can see the baby's head." With a final, powerful effort and a cry that seemed to echo through the entire aircraft, Elena pushed. And suddenly there it was, a new life, entering the world not in the sterile environment of a hospital but in the most unlikely of places, 7 miles above the earth. As the first thin cry of the newborn filled the cabin, Michael felt something shift inside him. All the worries about scholarships and foreclosures faded momentarily. He had just helped bring a life into the world. Nothing would ever be the same again. The rear galley of the airplane had transformed into something between a delivery room and a war zone. Discarded packaging from medical supplies littered the floor, and the flight attendants moved with quiet urgency, bringing fresh warm towels and following Michael's calm instructions. For Michael, time seemed to slow down. His hands worked w with a steadiness that surprised even him as he carefully checked the newborn baby girl. She was small, definitely premature, but her lungs worked perfectly, as everyone on the plane could now hear. "Is she okay?" Elena asked, her voice weak but urgent. Her face was flushed, hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, all glamour forgotten in the raw aftermath of childbirth. "She's perfect," Michael said, gently cleaning the tiny infant with warm water. "Small, but perfect." He wrapped the baby in a clean airline blanket that Patricia had warmed somehow and placed her on Elena's chest. The moment the child felt her mother's skin, her crying softened to small hiccuping sounds. Victor knelt beside his wife and daughter, one hand gently touching the baby's head, the other still firmly holding Elena's hand. Tears streamed down, his face unnoticed. "You did it," he whispered to Elena, then looked up at Michael. "You both did." But Michael knew they weren't out of danger yet. With premature births, complications could arise for both mother and baby. The makeshift medical area lacked equipment to monitor vital signs properly, and they were still at least 40 minutes from the nearest airport where proper medical help waited. "We need to keep them both warm," Michael said to Patricia. "And I need to check Elena regularly for excessive bleeding." The veteran flight attendant nodded. In her decades of flying, she'd seen medical emergencies before, but never a birth. "The captain says we're being diverted to Chicago. There will be an ambulance waiting when we land." "Good. We also need to monitor the baby's breathing. Premature. Babies sometimes have trouble." As Michael spoke, he was already preparing to deliver the placenta, something that Dr. Patel had emphasized was crucial to prevent hemorrhaging. Elena grimaced through this final stage of birth, her eyes never leaving her daughter's face. "What are you going to name her?" Michael asked, partly to distract Elena, partly out of genuine curiosity. Elena and Victor exchanged a look. "We had names picked out," Elena said softly, "but none of them seem right now." Victor nodded. "This little one clearly has her own ideas about timing. Maybe she should have her own name too." The placenta delivered safely. Michael checked Elena's bleeding, manageable, and then turned his attention to the newborn. The baby was breathing well but had a slightly bluish tint to her extremities that concerned him. "Can we get more blankets?" he asked Patricia. "And if possible, I'd like to have her close to her mother's skin. Body heat is the best way to keep her warm." As Patricia arranged this, Victor finally seemed to notice the state of his expensive suit, stained, rumpled, and likely ruined. He laughed softly, a sound of pure relief and joy. "You know," he said to Michael, "I was supposed to give a presentation to our board tomorrow about our company's new direction. Seemed so important this morning." Michael smiled as he monitored Elena's pulse. Funny how quickly priorities can change. Indeed. Victor looked at the young man properly for the first time. "How old are you?" 17, Michael admitted. Victor's eyebrows shot up. 17? And you just delivered my baby?" Michael flushed, slightly. "I volunteered at a free clinic in my neighborhood. The doctor there let me help with deliveries twice when mothers couldn't get to the hospital in time." "Lucky for us," Elena murmured, stroking her daughter's cheek with one finger. An announcement came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. First, I'm pleased to inform you that we have a new passenger on board." A cheer went up from the front of the plane. "We'll be landing at Chicago O'Hare International Airport in approximately 30 minutes. Medical personnel will board the aircraft first. We ask for your patience as we handle this special situation. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of activity. Michael continued to monitor both mother and baby, checking vital signs as best he could with the limited equipment available. The baby's color improved and her breathing settled into a more regular pattern, easing his biggest concern. Victor remained by Elena's side, but he kept glancing at Michael with an expression the teenager couldn't quite read. Finally, as they began their descent into Chicago, Victor spoke. "You saved them both," he said simply. "I don't even know your name." "Michael Chen," he replied, busy preparing Elena and the baby for the landing. He'd fashioned a secure wrap that kept the infant safely against her mother's chest. "Michael Chen," Victor repeated as if committing it to memory. "Where are you from, Michael?" "San Francisco," he answered, adjusting the blanket around Elena's shoulders. "South Side." Victor nodded, recognizing the area, one of the few remaining working-class neighborhoods in the increasingly expensive city. "And you're flying to New York because—" Michael hesitated, focusing on securing Elena's makeshift bed for landing. "Scholarship interviews, 3 universities." "For medical school?" Victor asked, his interest clearly piqued. "That's the plan," Michael said with a small smile. "If I can figure out how to pay for it." Before Victor could respond, the plane touched down with a slight bump. Elena winced, holding her baby closer. "Sorry about that," the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Folks, we'll be staying put right here on the tarmac. Medical personnel will be boarding momentarily. Please remain in your seats until further notice." True to his word, within minutes the front door of the aircraft opened, and paramedics rushed in, guided by flight attendants to the rear galley. Michael found himself suddenly pushed aside as professionals took over. He watched as they checked Elena's vitals, examined the baby, and prepared them both for transport. "You did this delivery?" One of the paramedics, an older woman with kind eyes, asked Michael. He nodded, suddenly feeling very young and very tired. "Good job, kid," she said, checking the baby's responses. "Really good job." They loaded Elena onto a stretcher, the baby still secured against her chest. As they prepared to move her off the plane, Elena reached out and caught Michael's hand. "Thank you," she said, her eyes bright with tears. "We won't forget this." Victor stood nearby, speaking urgently into his phone. "I need the best neonatal specialist at Northwestern to meet us." "Yes. I understand it's 5 a.m. Price is no object." As Elena was wheeled away, Victor turned to Michael. "You're coming with us?" It wasn't a question, but Michael shook his head anyway. "My flight to New York, the interviews—" "I'll take care of it," Victor said, in the tone of a man used to making problems disappear. "Right now I want the doctors to know exactly what happened during the delivery, and you're the only one who can tell them." Michael hesitated, looking back at his seat where his worn backpack still sat. Patricia stepped in. "I'll get your things, honey. You go on. This is important." And so Michael found himself following Victor Harrington off the plane and into a waiting ambulance. As the doors closed behind them and the siren wailed to life, Michael caught a glimpse of the other passengers watching through the plane windows. The elderly woman who had sat beside him gave him a thumbs up. The ride to Northwestern Memorial Hospital took less than 20 minutes, but it felt like entering another world. Elena was rushed immediately to a private room where a team of doctors and nurses waited. Michael followed, answering questions about the delivery in detail, explaining every step he had taken. "You kept your head," the attending physician told him after hearing the full story. "Not everyone would have in that situation." "Is she going to be okay?" Michael asked, nodding toward the baby, who was now in a special warming bassinet, being examined by a pediatrician. "Thanks to you, I think. Mother and baby will be just fine. The little one is about 4 weeks early, but she's a good weight and her vitals are strong. We'll keep them both for observation, but I don't anticipate complications." Relief washed over Michael like a wave, leaving exhaustion in its wake. He found himself guided to a chair in a quiet corner of the room. Victor appeared beside him, offering a cup of coffee. "Black, okay?" he asked. "I realized I don't know how you take it." "Black is fine," Michael said, accepting the cup gratefully. The warmth felt good in his suddenly cold hands. The adrenaline that had carried him through the night was fading fast. Victor sat beside him, his own coffee untouched. "I've arranged for a hotel room for you," he said, "and I've contacted the universities in New York. Your interviews have been rescheduled for next week." Michael blinked, trying to process this. "How did you—" "I made some calls," Victor said simply. "It's the least I could do." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the medical team work. Elena had been moved to a proper bed and was resting, her eyes closed. "My wife and daughter would have died," Victor said suddenly, his voice low and intense. "The doctor just told me. Without immediate intervention, Elena would have hemorrhaged and the baby's umbilical cord was wrapped around her neck. You saved them both." Michael swallowed hard. He hadn't known about the cord. He'd unwrapped it automatically during the delivery, following the steps Dr. Patel had taught him. "Anyone would have done the same," he said. Victor shook his head. "No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have frozen. You didn't." He turned to face Michael directly. "I've built a business empire worth billions. I employ over 50,000 people. I've changed the way the world uses technology, and none of it would mean anything if I had lost them tonight." He placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, his grip firm. "I owe you everything. Whatever you need, whatever you want, it's ours. Just name it." Michael looked at the man before him, one of the richest and most powerful people in the world, and saw only a grateful husband and father. The distance between their worlds, which had seemed so vast on the plane, had somehow shrunk to nothing in the space of a few hours. But before he could respond, a nurse approached. "Mr. Harrington, your wife is asking for both of you." They stood and walked to Elena's bedside. Her face was tired but radiant as she looked at the tiny bundle now cradled in her arms. "She's perfect," Elena said, looking up at them. "The doctors say she's completely healthy. Thanks to Michael," Victor said, his voice thick with emotion. Elena smiled at the teenager. "We've been talking about names," she said. "How do you feel about Michelle?" Michael blushed. "It's a beautiful name." "Michelle Chen Harrington," Elena said, testing the sound of it. "What do you think?" Michael's eyes widened. "Chen?" Victor nodded. "If that's okay with you, we'd like her middle name to be a reminder of the person who brought her safely into this world." For the first time since the ordeal began, Michael felt tears prick at his eyes. He blinked them back, overwhelmed by the gesture. "I'd be honored," he managed to say. As dawn broke over Lake Michigan, casting golden light through the hospital windows, Michael watched the new family together. Something tugged at his heart, not envy exactly, but a sharp awareness of his own family's struggles. His mother fighting for her life in a hospital much less equipped than this one. Their small house, soon to be lost. Victor noticed the change in his expression. "What is it?" he asked softly. Michael hesitated. The Harringtons had already given him more than he could have expected, but as he looked at baby Michelle, so tiny and vulnerable yet so full of promise, he made a decision. "There's something I'd like to talk to you about," he said. "But not now. This is your time with your family." Victor nodded, understanding. "Later, then. But remember what I said. Whatever you need." "It's not for me," Michael said quietly. "Or, at least not just for me." The morning sun grew stronger, illuminating the room fully now. In this light, the differences between them, age, wealth, background, seemed less important than what connected them. The miracle of new life and the fragility of the human condition that made every person, regardless of status, equal in the face of birth and death. As a nurse came to check the baby's vitals once more, Michael slipped out to find a quiet place to call his mother. He had quite a story to tell her, and for the first time in months, it was a story of hope. Michael found a quiet corner in the hospital waiting room. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes dancing in the air. He stared at his phone, gathering courage before dialing his mother's number. On the third ring, she picked up. "Michael, is everything okay?" Her voice sounded thin, tired, but there was always warmth in it, especially when she said his name. "Mom, you're not going to believe what happened." The words tumbled out of him in a rush as he described the flight, the emergency, the delivery. He could picture her expression changing from worry to amazement as he spoke. "Oh, my brave boy," she said when he finished. "I always knew those hands of yours were meant for healing." They talked for a few more minutes. Michael carefully avoided mentioning the Harringtons' wealth or Victor's promise to help him. He didn't want to raise hopes until he knew what might actually come of it. After making sure his mother had taken her morning medications, he promised to call again that evening, and reluctantly ended the call. When he returned to Elena's room, he found Victor standing outside, speaking in hushed tones with a doctor. Both men looked up as Michael approached. "There you are," Victor said. "Elena's resting, but she asked to see you when you came back." The doctor, a tall woman with steel-gray hair and kind eyes, extended her hand to Michael. "Dr. Reynolds, I understand we have you to thank for the safe delivery of little Michelle." Michael shook her hand, feeling oddly formal after the intimacy of the delivery. "I just did what I was taught." "You did a remarkable job," she said. "Mrs. Harrington had a condition that could have made things very complicated, but your quick actions prevented any serious issues." Victor nodded. "Dr. Reynolds is the best neonatal specialist in Chicago. She's been looking after Elena and Michelle since we arrived." "Will they be okay?" Michael asked. "Both mother and baby are doing exceptionally well," Dr. Reynolds assured him. "We'll keep them for observation for a few days, standard procedure with premature births, but all signs point to a full recovery." Relief washed over Michael. He hadn't realized how tense he'd been until that moment, still worried something might go wrong. "You should rest too," Dr. Reynolds added, looking at Michael with professional concern. "You've had quite a night." "I've arranged a room for him at the Four Seasons," Victor said. "Car's waiting whenever he's ready." Michael blinked. The Four Seasons? That was the kind of place people like him only saw in movies. "Maybe later," he said. "I'd like to check on Elena and the baby first, if that's okay." Dr. Reynolds smiled. "Of course. Just keep it brief. They both need rest." She excused herself, and Victor led Michael back into the private room. The contrast with the crowded ward where his mother received her treatments couldn't have been more stark. This room was spacious, quiet, with plush furniture and large windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Elena was propped up against pillows, looking tired but peaceful as she gazed at the tiny bundle in her arms. "There you are," she said softly when she saw Michael. "Come meet Michelle properly." Michael approached the bed hesitantly. In the chaos of the delivery and immediate aftermath, he hadn't really had a chance to look at the baby he'd helped bring into the world. Now, in the calm of the hospital room, he could see her clearly for the first time. Michelle was tiny, smaller than any newborn he'd seen, with a dusting of dark hair and delicate features that hinted at her mother's beauty. As Michael watched, she yawned, a small perfect O forming on her lips. "Would you like to hold her?" Elena asked. Michael hesitated. "I've never, not when it wasn't an emergency." Elena smiled. "Sit down. I'll show you." Under her guidance, Michael settled into a chair beside the bed and accepted the carefully wrapped bundle. Michelle weighed almost nothing in his arms, yet he felt the gravity of her completely. This new life he had helped usher into the world. "She looks like you," he told Elena. "Poor thing," Elena laughed softly. "Let's hope she grows out of it." Victor stood beside them, his phone forgotten for once. "We can never repay you," he said quietly. Michael looked up. "You don't need to, but we want to." Elena interrupted gently. "Victor told me about your scholarship interviews in New York." "Medical school?" Michael nodded, carefully adjusting his hold on Michelle as she squirmed slightly in her sleep. "That's wonderful," Elena said. "The world needs more doctors like you." ones who can stay calm in a crisis and care about their patients. I'm not a doctor yet, Michael reminded her. Still a long way to go. But you will be, Victor said with certainty. And we'd like to help make that happen. Before Michael could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. A nurse entered, coming to check Elena and Michelle's vital signs. Michael carefully handed the baby back to her mother and stood up. I should let you rest, he said. Not yet, Elena said. Victor, could you get my bag? Victor retrieved a sleek handbag from a nearby shelf and brought it to his wife. From it, Elena pulled a small velvet-covered box. This was my grandmother's, she explained, holding it out to Michael. She gave it to me before she died and told me to pass it on to someone special one day. I can't think of anyone more deserving. Surprised, Michael accepted the box and opened it. Inside was an antique pocket watch on a long gold chain. The case was engraved with intricate patterns, and when he pressed the small button on top, it popped open to reveal a face of cream-colored enamel with Roman numerals. It's beautiful, he said, stunned by the gift. But I couldn't. Please, Elena said firmly. I want you to have it. My grandmother always said time was the most precious gift we can give or receive. You gave us time with our daughter that we might not have had. Michael swallowed hard, touched by the gesture. He carefully closed the box and slipped it into his pocket. Thank you. The nurse finished her checks and quietly left the room. Elena looked exhausted now, her eyelids heavy. You should sleep, Michael told her. Both of you need rest. She nodded, already drifting off. Will you come back tomorrow, before you leave for New York? Of course, Michael promised. Victor walked him to the door. The car's waiting downstairs. Get some rest and we'll talk more later about how we can help. Michael nodded, suddenly feeling the full weight of his exhaustion. The adrenaline that had carried him through the night had completely drained away, leaving him lightheaded and heavy-limbed at the same time. The car turned out to be a sleek, black limousine with a uniformed driver who opened the door for Michael, as if he were someone important. The leather seats were soft as butter, and classical music played softly from hidden speakers. The Four Seasons, sir, the driver said. Mr. Harrington has arranged everything. Michael sank into the seat, too tired to feel out of place. As the car glided through morning traffic, he gazed out at the Chicago skyline, thinking about how much had changed in the past 12 hours. Yesterday, he'd been just another kid with big dreams and bigger obstacles. Today, he'd delivered a baby at 36,000 feet and was riding in a limousine to a luxury hotel. And yet, what truly mattered hadn't changed at all. His mother was still sick. Their house was still in foreclosure. His future still hung by the thread of scholarship interviews. The Four Seasons lobby was a cathedral of marble and glass. The staff greeted him by name. Mr. Harrington must have called ahead and escorted him to a suite larger than his entire house. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the lake and city. A gift basket waited on the dining table, along with a handwritten note from Victor, promising to come by that evening to talk. Michael showered, letting hot water wash away the stress and exhaustion of the night. Clean clothes had somehow appeared, jeans and t-shirts in exactly his size, still with tags attached. He put on the simplest outfit and crawled into a bed so comfortable it felt like floating. Despite his exhaustion, sleep didn't come immediately. His mind kept replaying the events on the plane, the feeling of the baby emerging into his hands, the look on Victor's face when he first held his daughter, and beneath it all, the constant worry about his mother, alone in their soon-to-be lost home, fighting a battle as desperate as any birth. When he finally drifted off, his dreams were a confused jumble of airplanes and hospital rooms, of tiny babies and ticking watches, of falling houses and rising medical bills. He woke to a gentle knocking on the door. Disoriented, he sat up, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. The clock by the bed read 4:30 p.m. He'd slept for almost 8 hours. The knocking came again. Michael pulled on a robe provided by the hotel and went to answer. Victor Harrington stood in the hallway, dressed in fresh clothes but looking as tired as Michael felt. The events of the night had left their mark on him too. "Sorry to wake you," he said. "I can come back later if you prefer." "No, it's fine," Michael said, stepping back to let him in. "I should get up anyway." Victor entered, declining Michael's awkward offer of a drink from the minibar. They sat in the suite's living area, the evening sun turning the lake to gold outside the windows. "Elena and Michelle are doing well," Victor said. "The doctors are very pleased with their progress." "That's great news," Michael said sincerely. Victor nodded, then leaned forward, his expression serious. "Michael, I meant what I said at the hospital. I owe you everything. Name it, and it's yours." Michael took a deep breath. This was the moment he'd been thinking about since the plane landed, since he'd first realized who Victor Harrington was and what he might be able to do. "It's not that simple," he began. "It can be," Victor insisted. "Money? A trust fund? Connections? For medical school, just tell me." Michael shook his head. "My mom has cancer," he said quietly. "Stage 3. The treatments. They've taken everything we had. We're losing our house next month, and I want to be a doctor more than anything, but medical school costs more than we could ever afford." Victor's expression softened. "I can take care of all of that, easily." But Michael wasn't finished. "The thing is, we're not the only ones. In my neighborhood, there are kids way smarter than me who'll never get a chance because they can't afford college. There are families losing everything to medical bills. There are clinics closing because they can't keep the lights on." He met Victor's gaze directly. "I don't want your money, sir. What I really want is for my mom to get the best treatment possible and—" Michael's voice cracked slightly. "And I want other kids like me to have a chance. Could you maybe start a scholarship fund for students who want to study medicine but can't afford it? Not just for me, but for others too." Victor stared at him, clearly not expecting this response. For a long moment he was silent, and Michael feared he'd somehow offended the billionaire. Then, to Michael's shock, Victor's eyes filled with tears. "My father was a janitor," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Did you know that? It's not in any of the magazine profiles. He cleaned office buildings at night and slept during the day. Never had more than a 6th grade education, but he saved every penny so I could go to college." Victor wiped his eyes, seemingly embarrassed by his display of emotion. "When I made my first million, I bought him a house. But you know what he did? He kept working. Said it wasn't about the money, it was about knowing he'd done his part to make things better for the next generation." He looked at Michael with new respect. "You remind me of him. Thinking of others when most people would be looking out for themselves." Michael hadn't expected this glimpse into Victor's past. The man's humble beginnings weren't mentioned in any of the business articles his teacher had shown the class. "So you'll think about it?" Michael asked. Victor laughed, a genuine sound of surprise and admiration. "Think about it? Young man, I'll do more than think about it. By this time tomorrow, there will be a foundation established in Michelle's name, dedicated to exactly what you've described." He stood up and began pacing, energy radiating from him as he pulled out his phone. "We'll start with full medical coverage for your mother, the best doctors, the best treatments. Then a complete scholarship. For you. Tuition, living expenses, books, everything. And then we'll expand to other students, other families." Michael watched, somewhat dazed, as Victor made a quick call, giving terse instructions to someone about setting up a meeting with his legal team immediately. When he hung up, Victor turned back to Michael. "Is there anything else? Anything at all?" Michael thought of the antique watch in its velvet box, of Elena's words about time being the most precious gift. "Just one thing," he said. "When the foundation is set up, I'd like to volunteer with it, during breaks from school. I want to help find the students who need it most." Victor's smile was warm. "Done. In fact, I insist on it. Nobody knows better than you what to look for." As the sun set over Chicago, casting long shadows across the lake, Michael realized that the most unexpected night of his life had led to the most unexpected day. He had boarded a plane hoping for scholarships that might give him a chance at his dreams. He was leaving with so much more. Not just security for himself and his mother, but the knowledge that others would benefit too. And somewhere in a hospital room nearby, a tiny girl named Michelle Chen Harrington slept peacefully in her mother's arms, unaware that her dramatic entrance into the world had already changed lives far beyond her own. The next morning dawned clear and bright over Chicago. Michael woke early, still adjusting to the luxurious hotel room that felt more like a dream than reality. He showered and dressed in some of the new clothes Victor had arranged for him. Simple jeans and a button-down shirt that fit better than anything he'd ever owned. As he was tying his shoes, his phone rang, his mother calling from San Francisco. "How are you feeling today?" he asked immediately. "Better than yesterday," she replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "But never mind me. Tell me more about this baby you delivered. I couldn't stop thinking about it all night." Michael laughed and filled in more details about the birth, carefully editing out the more frightening moments. No need to worry her with how close it had actually been. "And the parents?" she asked. "Are they grateful?" Michael hesitated. He hadn't told her about Victor Harrington yet, about the promises made or the foundation being created. It seemed, too, much like counting chickens before they hatched. "Very grateful," he said simply. "Mom, I might be coming home sooner than expected. My interviews in New York have been rescheduled for next week." "Oh? Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. I'll explain everything when I see you, okay?" After they hung up, Michael stood by the window, looking out at the sparkling waters of Lake Michigan. Part of him still couldn't believe what was happening. People like them didn't get breaks like this. Life had taught him that lesson over and his phone buzzed with a text from Victor. "Car waiting downstairs whenever you're ready. Elena and Michelle are looking forward to seeing you." The same limousine from yesterday waited at the hotel entrance. The driver greeted him with a respectful nod, as if Michael were someone important. The ride to the hospital was quick, Chicago's morning traffic seeming to part for the sleek black car. At the hospital, Michael was surprised to find himself escorted not to Elena's room, but to a small conference room. Victor waited inside, along with an older man in an expensive suit who was introduced as Mr. Donovan, Victor's attorney. "Hope you don't mind the detour," Victor said, shaking Michael's hand. "I wanted to show you something before we visit Elena and Michelle." Mr. Donovan opened a leather portfolio and spread several documents on the table. "We've been working through the night," he explained in a clipped, efficient voice. Mr. Harrington was quite insistent on the urgency. Michael sat down, suddenly, nervous. The papers before him were filled with legal language he couldn't begin to understand. "Don't worry," Victor said, noting his expression. "I'll translate the lawyer speak. These are the founding documents for the Michelle Chen Harrington Foundation for Medical Education and Care." Michael's eyes widened. "You've done it already." Victor smiled. "When I make a promise, I keep it. The foundation has an initial endowment of $50 million, enough to fund scholarships for hundreds of students and medical care for families in need." The amount was so large Michael couldn't really comprehend it. It was just a number, meaningless in its enormity. The Saint beneficiaries, Victor continued, will be you and your mother. We've already arranged for her transfer to UCSF Medical Center, where she'll receive treatment from the top oncology team on the West Coast. All expenses covered, of course. Michael's throat tightened. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Victor replied. "But there is something I'd like to ask you." He pushed another document across the table. This one had Michael's name prominently displayed at the top. "What's this?" Michael asked. "A full scholarship to any medical school that accepts you, plus living expenses, books, everything you'll need. But more than that, it's an offer. We'd like you to serve on the Foundation's selection committee during your breaks from school. Help us find other students like yourself who deserve a chance." Michael stared at the document, trying to process what this meant. Just 3 days ago, he'd been lying awake at night worrying about how to pay for even the application fees for medical school, let alone tuition. Now his entire future had been secured with the stroke of a pen. "There's something else," Victor added, his voice softer now. "About your house." Michael looked up sharply. The foreclosure notice had been sitting on their kitchen table when he left, the final deadline just weeks away. "It's been taken care of," Victor said simply. "The mortgage has been paid in full. The house is yours and your mother's, free and clear." This was too much. Michael felt tears threatening and blinked them back hard. "Mr. Harrington, Victor, please," the older man corrected gently. "Victor," Michael managed. "This is more than I ever expected, more than I asked for." Victor leaned forward. "Michael, do you know what my company does?" The question seemed out of place, but Michael nodded. "Tech, software and hardware integration, mostly for businesses." "That's right. And do you know how much our stock has risen in the past year?" Michael shook his head. 327%, Victor said. "Do you know what that means in dollars?" Again, Michael shook his head. "It means my personal wealth increased by over $4 billion. For doing what exactly? Making already efficient businesses marginally more efficient? Creating software that will be obsolete in 5 years?" Victor's voice had taken on an edge of something like bitterness. "Meanwhile, kids like you are struggling to get an education that would let them save lives." He stood up and paced to the window. "What you asked for yesterday. It was so much less than what you deserved, and so much more meaningful than anything I could have offered. You made me remember what matters." Michael didn't know how to respond to this unexpected vulnerability from a man who, by all accounts, had everything. Mr. Donovan cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should review the terms of the scholarship," he suggested, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional turn the conversation had taken. "Of course," Victor said, returning to his seat. "Michael, the short version is this. You'll receive full funding for your education and living expenses. In return, we ask that you maintain a certain GPA and that you commit to working in underserved communities for at least 5 years after you complete your residency. Does that sound fair?" "More than fair," Michael said quietly. They spent the next 30 minutes going through the details. The foundation would not only support Michael's education, but would fund scholarships for 10 other students in its first year, expanding to 50 within 5 years. It would also provide financial support for families facing catastrophic medical expenses and fund improvements to clinics in underserved areas. As Mr. Donovan explained the various provisions, Michael found himself thinking of Dr. Patel and the tiny underfunded clinic where he'd volunteered. What could a place like that do with proper resources? How many more people could they help? "There's one more thing," Victor said as they wrapped up. "Elena and I would like to establish a personal connection with you going forward, not just as a scholarship recipient, but as someone who's important to our family. Michelle will grow up knowing the story of how she came into the world, and we want her to know the person who made it possible." Michael nodded, touched by the gesture. "I'd like that too." After signing several documents, Mr. Donovan patiently explaining each one, they made their way to Elena's room. The difference in Elena from yesterday was remarkable. The exhaustion had faded from her face, replaced by the radiant glow of new motherhood. She sat up in bed, baby Michelle cradled in her arms. "There he is," she said warmly when Michael entered. "Our hero." Michael blushed. "How are you feeling?" "Much better. And this little one is doing wonderfully. The doctors say we might be able to go home in just a few days." Michael approached the bed, looking down at Michelle. The baby seemed bigger, already her face less red, her tiny features more defined. As he watched, she opened her eyes, dark blue, almost black, and seemed to look right at him. "She knows you," Elena said softly. Victor joined them, placing a hand on Michael's shoulder. "I've told Elena about our discussion yesterday, and about the foundation." Elena's eyes shone with approval. "It's perfect. A way to honor what happened, and to help others at the same time." She shifted Michelle in her arms. "Would you like to hold her?" Michael carefully took the baby, marveling again at how light she was, yet how completely she commanded attention. Michelle yawned and settled against his chest, apparently content. "I think she remembers you," Elena said. They spent the next hour talking about the foundation, about Michael's hopes for medical school, about his mother's condition. The conversation flowed easily, as if they'd known each other for years rather than days. When a nurse came in to check on Elena and Michelle, Michael reluctantly handed the baby back and prepared to leave. "Will you visit us in San Francisco?" Elena asked. "Once we're settled back home?" "I'd like that," Michael said. "And bring your mother when she's feeling up to it," Victor added. "I'd like to meet the woman who raised such an extraordinary young man." Outside the hospital, the day had turned warm and bright. Michael found himself walking rather than immediately getting into the waiting limousine. He needed time to process everything that had happened, to adjust to this new reality where his most pressing worries had suddenly been lifted. His phone buzzed with a text from the airline, confirming his new flight to San Francisco that evening. Victor had arranged for him to go home first, to see his mother and explain everything in person, before heading to New York for his rescheduled interviews. As he walked along the lakefront, Michael thought about how differently things might have turned out if he'd been seated in another part of the plane, if he hadn't volunteered at Dr. Patel's clinic, if Elena's labor had progressed more slowly, allowing for an emergency landing. So many chance factors had aligned to put him in that exact place at that exact time. And now, because of those chance factors, his life and his mother's life had been irrevocably changed. But it wasn't just about them. The foundation would help hundreds, maybe thousands of others. Kids like him who had the drive and the ability, but lacked the resources. Families like his who faced financial ruin because of illness. Michael thought about what Dr. Patel always told him during their long hours at the clinic. Medicine isn't just about treating disease. It's about healing the whole person, and sometimes healing the systems that made them sick in the first place. The foundation was a step toward that kind of healing, not just treating individual cases of financial hardship, but addressing one of the systems that created it. It wouldn't solve everything, but it was a start. By the time Michael returned to the hotel to pack his few belongings, he felt more centered. The whirlwind of the past 2 days had settled into something that felt real and solid. He had delivered a baby on an airplane. He had met one of the wealthiest men in the world and somehow inspired him to create a multi-million-dollar foundation. And most importantly, his mother would get the treatment she needed and their home was safe. As he packed, Michael carefully wrapped Elena's gift, the antique pocket watch, and placed it in his carry-on bag. He would show it to his mother when he told her everything that had happened. It would be a tangible reminder that sometimes, in the most unexpected moments, life could change for the better. That evening, as his plane took off from Chicago, Michael looked down at the city lights. Growing smaller below, somewhere down there was a hospital room where a mother and her newborn daughter slept peacefully. Somewhere down there was a conference room where papers had been signed that would change countless lives. And ahead of him was San Francisco, where his mother waited, unaware that the burden she'd carried alone for so long was about to be lifted. For the first time in years, Michael allowed himself to feel something he'd almost forgotten. Hope, pure and uncomplicated, for the future. The flight attendant stopped by his seat, offering a beverage. "First time flying?" she asked, noting how he gripped the armrests during takeoff. Michael smiled. "No," he said. "But it's my first normal flight. The last one was quite an experience. If only she knew. But that was a story for another time." For now, Michael was content to sit back, close his eyes and let the plane carry him home, toward a future suddenly bright with possibility. 5 years passed like the turning of pages in a well-loved book, each chapter bringing new developments and deeper connections. On a bright spring morning, Michael Chen stood in front of a full-length mirror, adjusting the tassel on his graduation cap. The deep blue gown of Columbia University's College of Physicians and Surgeons hung from his shoulders, the weight of it both literal and symbolic. In a few hours, he would walk across a stage and officially become Dr. Michael Chen. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called. His mother entered, elegant in a simple blue dress that matched his gown. The years had been kind to her since her recovery. Her hair, once thinned by chemotherapy, was now full and sleek, with only a few strands of silver among the black. The treatments at UCSF Medical Center, the best oncology team on the West Coast, just as Victor had promised, had worked better than anyone dared hope. "Oh, look at you," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Your father would have been so proud." Michael smiled and embraced her. "You look beautiful, Mom." "Are you nervous?" she asked, straightening his already straight collar. "A little," he admitted, "but mostly excited." They were interrupted by another knock. This time when the door opened, it revealed Victor Harrington, looking much the same as he had 5 years ago, except for a few more lines around his eyes and a touch more gray at his temples. Behind him came Elena, as elegant as ever, and holding. Her hand was a little girl with dark hair and serious eyes. "Michelle," Michael exclaimed, kneeling down to the child's level. "You've grown so much since I saw you last Christmas." Michelle Chen Harrington, now 5 years old and every bit as poised as her mother, smiled shyly. "I made you a card," she said, holding out a handmade creation covered in glitter and drawings of what appeared to be people in doctor's coats. "It's beautiful," Michael said, examining it carefully. "Is that me?" Michelle nodded. "You're helping people get better," she explained, pointing to the figures drawn around the central doctor. "Like you helped me and Mommy." The simplicity of her understanding touched Michael deeply. To Michelle, the story of her birth was a fairy tale she'd heard countless times, how a boy on an airplane had helped bring her into the world when she decided to arrive early. Victor stepped forward, holding out his hand. "Congratulations, Dr. Chen," he said, the pride in his voice unmistakable. "Well earned." Michael stood and shook his hand. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Nonsense," Victor replied. "You'd have found a way. We just made the path a little smoother." Elena embraced Michael warmly. "We wouldn't have missed this for anything," she said. "It feels like we've come full circle." Indeed it did. 5 years ago, Michael had been a boy with dreams that seemed almost impossible to reach. Now he stood on the threshold of the career he'd always wanted, surrounded by both his original family and the unexpected additions that fate had brought into his life. "We should head to the ceremony," his mother reminded them gently. "You don't want to be late for your own graduation." The Columbia University campus was transformed for commencement, with chairs set up in neat rows and decorative banners hanging from every available surface. As they made their way to their seats, Michael noticed many familiar faces from the Michelle Chen Harrington Foundation. There was Dr. Patel, who had closed his tiny clinic in San Francisco after Victor offered him the position of medical director for the foundation. Now he oversaw a network of state-of-the-art community health centers in underserved areas across the country. Nearby sat Lisa and Raj, two of the first scholarship recipients Michael had helped select during his first year of medical school. They had graduated last year and were now completing their residencies, both committed to working in the communities they'd come from. And scattered throughout the crowd were other students, doctors, nurses, and families whose lives had been touched by the foundation that had grown from a moment of crisis on an airplane 5 years ago. The ceremony began with the traditional pomp and circumstance, speeches from university officials and distinguished alumni. Michael sat among his classmates, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought him here. When the dean began calling names, Michael found himself holding his breath, waiting. Each graduate received their diploma and hood, transforming from student to doctor in that brief moment on stage. "Michael Chen," the dean finally called. As Michael walked across the stage, a small but enthusiastic cheering section erupted from where his unusual extended family sat. He could hear Michelle's high, clear voice above the rest. "That's my doctor." The dean smiled as he handed Michael his diploma. "I understand you've already delivered your first baby," he said quietly, clearly familiar with Michael's story. Michael laughed. "Under slightly unusual circumstances, yes." After the ceremony, they gathered for pictures, an unlikely but harmonious group. Michael and his mother, Victor, Elena, and Michelle, Dr. Patel, and several foundation scholarship recipients who had become Michael's friends over the years. "We have a surprise for you," Victor announced as they finished with photos. "A graduation gift of sorts." He handed Michael an envelope. Inside was a set of keys and an address in Washington Heights, not far from the Columbia Medical Campus. "What's this?" Michael asked, confused. "The keys to your new clinic," Elena explained. "Well, the Foundation's clinic, but you'll be running it." Michael looked from the keys to Victor and Elena, stunned. "Running it? But I just graduated. I'm supposed to start my residency next month." "You'll still do your residency," Victor assured him. "But the board of the Foundation unanimously voted to establish a new community health center in New York, with you as the medical director once you complete your training. In the meantime, you'll be involved in the planning and setup. Dr. Patel will mentor you through the process." Dr. Patel nodded, his expression warm. "You're ready for this, Michael. You've been ready since that night on the plane." Michael felt overwhelmed. He had expected to work for the Foundation in some capacity after completing his residency. But this was beyond anything he'd imagined. A clinic of his own, serving people who needed it most, carrying forward the work that Dr. Patel had begun in San Francisco. "I don't know what to say," he managed finally. "Say yes," his mother urged, squeezing his arm. "This is everything you've worked for." "There's more," Victor added. "The clinic is just the beginning. The Foundation is expanding its mission. We're not just funding scholarships in medical care anymore. We're going to address the systemic issues that create healthcare inequality in the first place." He explained the Foundation's new initiatives, lobbying for policy changes, developing new models for community healthcare delivery, creating pathways for students from underrepresented backgrounds to enter medical professions. "And we want you to be part of shaping that future," Elena said. "Not just as a doctor, but as a leader." Michael thought about the scared teenager he'd been on that flight, doing his best with limited knowledge and resources. He thought about how that night had changed not just his life, but the lives of countless others through the Foundation's work. "Yes," he said simply. "I'd be honored." Michelle, who had been listening with the serious expression she often wore, tugged at Michael's gown. "Does this mean you'll be my doctor forever?" she asked. Michael knelt down to her level again. "I'll always be here if you need me," he promised. "But you know what? I bet someday you'll be a doctor too, if you want to be." Michelle considered this idea with grave concentration. "Maybe," she said finally. "Or maybe I'll build things like Daddy does, but bigger. Things that help people." "Whatever you choose," Michael told her. "You'll be amazing at it." Later that evening, they gathered for a celebration dinner at a restaurant overlooking Central Park. As glasses were raised in toast after toast, Michael found himself seated beside Victor for a moment of relative quiet. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" Michael asked him. "When you made that promise on the plane?" Victor looked thoughtful. "I promised you anything you wanted," he recalled. "But what you asked for was so much more meaningful than what most people would have requested." He glanced across the table at Michelle, animatedly telling a story to Michael's mother, who listened with genuine interest. "She's named after you, you know. Not just in the middle name we gave her, officially, but in her spirit. Elena and I have tried to raise her with the same values you showed that night. Compassion, selflessness, thinking of others before yourself." Michael felt humbled by this. "She's a remarkable kid." "The Foundation has helped hundreds of students and thousands of families," Victor continued. "It's grown beyond anything I initially envisioned, all because you didn't ask for what would benefit just yourself." He turned to look directly at Michael. "Do you remember what I told you that day in the hospital? About my father?" Michael nodded. "That he was a janitor. That he kept working even after you made your fortune because it wasn't about the money." "That's right. He died 2 years ago," Victor said quietly. "But before he went, he told me he was prouder of what I'd done with the Foundation than of all my business success combined." Michael hadn't known about Victor's father's passing. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said sincerely. "Thank you. The thing is, I realized something as he was dying. Success isn't measured in dollars or stock options or square footage. It's measured in lives touched and systems changed for the better, in moments when you choose compassion over convenience. He raised his glass slightly. You taught me that, Dr. Chen. On a night when most people would have been focused on their own concerns, you stepped up for strangers, and when offered anything you wanted, you chose to help others. Michael felt his throat tighten with emotion. I just did what seemed right, and that's exactly why you're the perfect person to help lead the foundation into its next phase, Victor said. Because doing what's right comes naturally to you. The evening continued with more stories, more laughter, more plans for the future. As Michael looked around the table at these people who had become his extended family, he thought about the incredible chain of events that had brought them all together. If Elena hadn't gone into labor on that particular flight, if Michael hadn't been seated just a few rows away, if he hadn't volunteered at Dr. Patel's clinic those summers, if he hadn't found the courage to raise his hand when the flight attendant asked for help, so many chance factors had aligned to create this moment. And yet it wasn't just chance. It was also the choices they had all made in response to those chances. Michael's choice to help, Victor's choice to give back, Elena's choice to honor Michael's contribution, Dr. Patel's choice to expand his vision for community healthcare. As the evening wound down and goodbyes were said, Michelle insisted on walking out with Michael. She slipped her small hand into his as they left the restaurant. When I grow up, she said confidentially, I'm going to build hospitals, big ones, in places that don't have any, and everyone can come even if they don't have money. Michael smiled down at her. That sounds like a wonderful plan. It's because of the story, she explained matter-of-factly, about how you helped me be born even though you didn't know Mommy and Daddy, about how you asked them to help other people too. She looked up at him with those serious eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond her years. Daddy says that's the best kind of person, someone who helps people they don't even know. Out on the sidewalk as they waited for cars to take them to their respective destinations, Michelle hugged Michael fiercely. I'm glad you were on our airplane, she said. Me too, Michael replied, hugging her back. More than you can imagine. As he watched their car pull away, Michelle waving through the back window, Michael felt the weight of his graduation tassel still tucked in his pocket. He'd removed it from his cap earlier, a tangible reminder of all he'd accomplished. But the true measure of his journey wasn't in the tassel or the diploma. It was in the lives that had been changed, including his own, because of a chance encounter at 36,000 feet. Michael pulled out the antique pocket watch that Elena had given him 5 years ago. He still carried it everywhere, a reminder of that night and all that had followed. The engraved case gleamed in the city lights as he opened it to check the time. Inside the cover, Elena had later added an inscription. To Michael, who showed us that the greatest gift is not what we receive but what we give. With eternal gratitude, the Harringtons. Michael closed the watch and returned it to his pocket. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new opportunities to make a difference. His journey was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But tonight, standing on a New York sidewalk with his graduation gown draped over his arm and the future stretching out before him, Dr. Michael Chen allowed himself a moment to simply be grateful for the remarkable path that had brought him here, a path that began with a single choice to help when help was needed most.